In the years between Final Fantasy 4 and 6, or 2 and 3 known in North America, Squaresoft was building its legacy on the SNES. Every game that came out after 4 was anticipated by JRPG junkies. I know games like Dragon Warrior helped build the platform that Final Fantasy stood on in North America. The thing is, Final Fantasy built a dynasty that Enix wanted to have in the same market. Besides the point, Squaresoft started running with it like the Dallas Cowboys ran DeMarco Murray. They almost always had hits in the works. Between 4 and 6, you had Final Fantasy Legend 3, Romancing Saga 1 and 2 in Japan, a classic in Secret of Mana. Capcom came to them to handle the localization of Breath of Fire, and in the middle of the good stretch of games was the black sheep of them all. It was called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest or Final Fantasy USA everywhere else. In 1992, Squaresoft, instead of releasing Final Fantasy V, they would give us this instead. A new team was brought on since Hironobu Sakaguchi was hard worked on Final Fantasy V. Here comes another history theory from me that's been said 100 times before me and will be said many times after. At this time, Final Fantasy hasn't caught on as much as Squaresoft would have liked. They thought maybe it was because of North Americans were too stupid to get some of the complex elements of the game's plot or combat. Not to mention, this was the first that Europe got. Could you imagine hearing how much hype Final Fantasy got from Nintendo Power, and this is what you got? I would never play another Final Fantasy game ever again out of fear that it would insult my intelligence again. According to Moe Games, what the writers in Chihiro Fujioka previously worked on Final Fantasy Legend 3 and would go on to help design Super Mario RPG along with Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga sequels known as Bowser's Inside Story and Partners in Time. Also, this is coming from Wikipedia though, the guys who did the music for Mystic Quest and Ryuji Sasai and Yasuhiro Kawakami also worked on Final Fantasy Legend 3. Their fates wouldn't be as fruitful or respected. According to Wikipedia, Kawakami would go on to work on 3 more games in Rudra no Hino, Tobound No. 1, and Bushido Blade 2 before fading away. Same goes for Sasai, but he became a part of a Queen tribute band called Queen Mania and plays for a rock band called Cabaret. Don't know how much is true, but if it is at all, the wrong guys got screwed. More on that later. So needless to say, the game failed at its job. The story goes when it was released, it didn't draw in new fans, pissed off hardcore fans who were looking forward to next-rate Final Fantasy Falling 4, and was said that it was Final Fantasy with an identity crisis. Over time, it has been hailed as an embarrassment and an example of what not to do to draw in new mainstream gamers. Not to mention, it's considered one of the worst Final Fantasy games ever. As for Europe, rumor has it that fans were notorious for importing the Japanese Final Fantasy V, kanji dictionary, and shared printed translations of the game. If this is true, I wish North America was this smart. I would have loved to have known a few people who did that. So, since I got my long-winded history lesson that took up 3/4 of a page, let's delve into the game. The plot is a deadweight that is only there to give the writer something to do. All it amounts to is go revive the elemental creatures, you're the hero of light, blah blah blah. Go here, kill this enemy, go there, defeat him, go here, meet her to fix the crystal, and so on. It's enough for you to say it's a story, but there's not enough here for you to really care. The graphics are okay at best and basic at worst. The game looks pretty generic at its core. The monsters are decent looking and the levels are decently sized. The problem is that it's very generic. It has no soul or substance at all. Sure, it's decently done, but it gives you no reason to remember it at all. Seriously, the only cool feature I could even come up with is how enemies change their look. After enemies have taken a certain amount of damage, they will change shape to show how close you are to killing them. This is a cool touch, and will probably be the only thing you remember graphics-wise about the game. The audio is awesome. The music is incredible. You know how I said the wrong guys got the screws too? Well, the music is so good that it will be remembered for years to come. It's like a kid on a sugar rush. There's not a moment where the music doesn't really have, lack of energy. Some really good tracks I would like to mention are the standard battle and boss battle themes. It's just one of the better soundtracks in the series and on the SNES or Super Nintendo. The gameplay is boring. Seriously, this game is a joke and the textbook example of what my parents like to call all games a big waste of time. Not to mention, I would doubt it would draw mainstream players to the game. The game uses a very similar combat engine to other games such as Final Fantasy 1, 2, Legend 1, and 2, with a lot of differences. The party size has been reduced from 5 in Final Fantasy 4 to 2. This limits the amount of options in fights and feels like it was a decision to make fights shorter. This was also one of many decisions intended to cut the fat that most RPGs have. The overworld has also been limited as well. Instead of a completely open world, you got to select areas with different things you can enter. The best way to describe it is that it's like selecting levels in a game like Super Mario 3. There are battlefields all over the place, and when all the fights in the area will get you cash, items, and experience. Another difference is that they wanted to make it feel more like a Zelda game because of its popularity. So they put elements of those such as floor and switch puzzles. Last, they took out all random encounters. All fights can be seen on screen and can be avoided at any time. Now, with all that said, let's poke holes into this paper bag of a game, shall we? There are 3 big problems that blow any argument that the game tried to cut out the fat most RPGs have. The first problem is that the fights are boring. You can sit there pressing the crap out the A button while watching porn and win about 90% of the fights in the game. This makes fights completely useless and a total chore. The second problem is in the treasure chests. Every minor treasure chest can be abused again and again to get 99 of any item, making money useless. How, you may ask? By opening the treasure chest, leaving the area that you're in, and re-entering said area. Do this again and again until you have the maximum number of that item that you are looking for. The third issue is that the puzzles are worthless. They are so blatantly easy, a 4-year-old could figure them out playing this game. To top it all off, the game indirectly insults you as a gamer. I know you want to draw in mainstream gamers, but this isn't how you do it. You don't hold their hand and treat them like a retarded monkey. The way you do it is by introducing and easing them into the tropes of the genre. There's not a second playing this that I didn't feel like I had my hand held like a baby, and quite frankly, mainstream gamers were and are now smarter than this. Overall, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest stinks. It treats you like a retard from beginning to end, and it's a shame. This could have been what Final Fantasy VII would have become, and quite frankly, it had the infamy that it has now coming. Skip over it if you can. If Munchkin could be used as a way to introduce people to the tropes of Dungeons and Dragons and still be fun, then Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is the polar opposite. Overall, I give it a 4.5 out of 10.